Hey Hannibal, I wanted to go ahead and provide a refutation of your video called "A Sadist Pokes an Objectivist with a Stick," because there certainly are several things I think I should address. The first thing I want to address happens at around 41 seconds of your video. You say nothing Ayn Rand ever did was actually original. That's actually false. Obviously her novels were original as far as I know, and as far as the philosophy, apparently her claim that existence is identity is a new formulation of the axiom of identity. Apparently, what's also original to her is measurement omission and concept formation. Her answer that the relationship among similars is mathematical, and her theory of concepts is apparently original to her as well. Also, Dr. Harry Binswanger has created an MP3 about Ayn Rand's philosophic achievement. It's behind a paywall, so I will at the very least read the synopsis of the MP3. Quote, "For the centenary of Ayn Rand's birth, these two lectures take stock of and summarize her immense achievement and philosophic legacy. The philosophy of objectivism. Dr. Binswanger singles out for discussion 6 pivotal breakthroughs that form the core of objectivism. Then he identifies the overarching conception that integrates these breakthroughs. The lectures include an analysis of Ayn Rand's philosophic methodology, the means by which she succeeded in solving the philosophic problems that have gripped and stultified philosophy for millennia, placing objectivism in historical perspective. Dr. Binswanger presents Ayn Rand's philosophic achievement as the completion of the work of Aristotle." Unquote. Also, how is starting your video off by saying nothing Ayn Rand ever did was original, and she ripped off everything from other scholars and philosophers, and that you don't consider Ayn Rand a philosopher, not poisoning the well, as you erroneously call what is actually, or what you really mean is, invective and personal attacks? How you can be so obtuse and such a hypocrite is hard to fathom. You whine about invective and personal attacks and poisoning the well and ad hom, and yet you engage throughout the video in those very things. Even though, as will be explained, you misused ad hominem and poisoning the well. Your hypocrisy, Hannibal, is unbelievable. At around 2:43 of your video, you claim I committed an informal fallacy called poisoning the well. That shows you don't know what you're talking about on that. What I actually did there was simply make observations about your behavior and your video, which clearly should not and is not a fallacy. But even more, what is poisoning the well? A quick look at NISCOR will let us see your claim is false. I didn't present unfavorable information about you and then say that any claims you make or have made are false. Poisoning the well is not committed when a person does address the substance of the matter and not simply the person. And I addressed the substance several times. At around 3:36 of your video, Hannibal, you say a classic tactic of objectivism is the ad hominem attack and poisoning of the well. Not to insult you, but just to make an observation about your behavior, you sound very ignorant. Where you get off ascribing such things to a philosophy as a whole is hard to understand, as if the philosophy itself explicitly espouses using ad hominem attacks against opponents. From 4:15 to 5:05, you go off on a rant that makes very little sense. You take me to task for not making an argument for why your video was disgusting, when an argument was made to back that up, which is that it was disgusting for you to make a 16-minute rant over a troll. So at 6:32, you say you were well aware he was more than likely a troll. In my view, you say this simply to save face and to defend yourself from the fact that it would look stupid for you not to have been smart enough to realize a troll when you see one. But the problem with this excuse is that it doesn't make you look any better. And here's why. If you fail to realize the person was a troll, then that makes you look stupid. But you say you were well aware he was more than likely a troll. But then in my view, that makes what you did irresponsible. If you were aware the person was more than likely a troll, then it was dishonest and irresponsible of you to pass judgments and make accusations against objectivists and objectivism based on the actions and behavior of a person you were well aware was more than likely a troll. At around 7:25, you say his avatar didn't reveal anything other than he didn't like Anita Sarkeesian. No, it revealed he was a troll, as he himself even admitted, if I remember correctly. No one who wants to be taken seriously would have an avatar of a woman having been beat up. That's a red flag. You're dealing with a troll. At around 11:41, you misunderstand the context upon which I feel you are sadistic. First off, in that part of the video, I didn't call you a sadist. I said sadistic. And secondly, the manner in which this is the case is not sexual, but consistent with what is known as sadistic personality disorder, where a person's behavior is characterized by callous, vicious, manipulative, and degrading behavior expressed towards other people. Your behavior throughout your video fully supports that psychological assessment. You say that anarcho-capitalism is completely compatible with Randian objectivism. This again shows you are ignorant of objectivism and hard-headed. They are not compatible. They entail two different views that are antithetical to one another. Objectivism is heavily against anarchy. You actually sort of bait and switch the situation around 1615. You say John Galt could very well be an anarcho-capitalist and still believe in plenty of objectivist ideas. Well, sure, but that's not what I said. I said he cannot be an objectivist and an anarcho-capitalist. Can he be an anarcho-capitalist while holding to some objectivist ideas like the trader principle or objective reality? Of course. But holding to some ideas of objectivism, yet calling yourself an anarcho-capitalist, is not the same as someone saying they are both an anarcho-capitalist and an objectivist. And that was my point. At around 1851, you say your drive the dagger home comment was a rhetorical device. Yeah, it was. And I felt it was sadistic in its manner as far as the intent behind it, which to me is a display of callousness. And your behavior elsewhere and on this video fully supports that my psychological assessment of you was and is correct. At 1929, you dishonestly misrepresent. You show a clip of me talking about the hallmark of objectivism. But when you comment on the situation, you dishonestly switch the situation to being about what Rand said, when the situation was not about what she said, but rather what the hallmark of objectivism is. And what you have her saying is not the hallmark of objectivism. What I said is the hallmark of objectivism. Now, at around 20:02 of your video, you say, according to Ayn Rand, people do not owe anybody else in society anything. You say that's her words. Now, I don't want to go so far as to accuse you of lying, but based on researching, I can't find any exact quote of her saying that, since you say that's her words. So I do ask that you provide the source of this claim. Furthermore, since you are clearly ignorant of objectivism, you don't realize that not everything Ayn Rand said or felt is in objectivism. For example, she was anti-feminist, but anti-feminism is, as far as I know, not a part of the objectivist philosophy. You go on to say that she says we have no duty to anybody else in society to do anything. And then, in conjunction with the non-aggression principle, you feel there is a contradiction. As you say, her first premise is contradicted by the second premise. You are wrong. There is no contradiction. This is because when Ayn Rand spoke about duty, she is talking about positive obligations, as opposed to the negative obligation of the non-aggression principle. This is proved when she defined duty as the moral necessity to perform certain actions for no reason other than obedience to some higher authority, without regard to any personal goal, motive, desire, or interest. There is no contradiction because duty, as Rand defines it, is a positive obligation, while the non-aggression principle is a negative obligation principle. At 2408, you make a mistake and mispronounce Rene Descartes' name. It's not Descartes, it's Descartes. At around 2723, you again get objectivism wrong. You say Rand's idea that we can tell concrete for certain things about existence simply by looking at it and using our experience and our sensory input is wrong, since you left out the application of logic and reason to the epistemic dynamic, which is essential in objectivism. You also say our senses deceive us. This is false as well. Our senses don't deceive us. They accurately give us sensory input about our environment consistent with the conditions of some given environment and the means by which we are perceiving. It is the task of reason and logic to make sure that the knowledge or data we get from our sense of sight or our senses in general is being interpreted correctly. For example, when we see a bent pencil in water, this is not an example of our sense of sight deceiving us. The senses are validly reporting or perceiving what is there, which is a stick immersed in a jar of water, and its bent imagery. This is a correct perception even though the pencil is not really bent, because our sense of sight is accurately perceiving the conditions that make the pencil look bent, which is the different refractive angles and refractive indexes between water and air. Your attack on objectivity and perception is also so irrational, it's self-refuting. If our senses deceive us, as you say, and we can't tell concrete things about the world, where did you get the knowledge about wavelengths of light, eyes, retinas, desks, and fingers, if not by your or someone else's perception? If objectivity is false, and we can't tell concrete things about the world, then it is self-refuting and irrational for you to say we can't tell concrete things about the world, since that statement itself is said objectively. In other words, you're not saying it is just your opinion, but you are stating it as a fact. And facts are objective, not subjective. You are utterly fallacious in your thinking. If you can't tell concrete things about the world, then what business do you have telling us about concrete things like desks, atoms, molecules, charges, and electrical fields? If we can't tell concrete, objective things about the world, then almost everything, if not everything you say, means nothing, since they are not objective facts, but just your subjective opinion. You again say something false at 2941, when you say objectivity and reason isn't even defined. That's false. It is defined and has been defined for years in the lexicon, and should not have taken much intelligence for you to figure out that it was there and to read the definitions yourself, since you already went to the lexicon to read about the Trader principle. Also, my point or task was not to define those terms, but to correct your error on what you thought the hallmark of objectivism is. You misrepresent at around 3041. In this situation, I didn't say anything about premises, but again was just correcting you on your erroneous claim about what the hallmark of objectivism is. Do you not know what the hallmark of something is, Hannibal? A hallmark is a signature characteristic. When someone says the hallmark of something, then that means its most important or essential signature characteristic. And that for objectivism is objectivity and reason, since those two characteristics pervade and imbue all of the philosophy's branches. At 3455, you make another mistake, and the elementary one at that, as you get my screen name wrong, calling me electric media rather than eclectic media. This seems rather insignificant, but it's rather not, as it is another example not only of how you get things wrong so much, but also is just sloppy, lazy, unprofessional, and frankly incompetent as something that should be easy to get right, since it's right in your face and empirically verifiable. At 38:55 of your video, you say there is no reason to make a distinction between positive rights and negative rights. And this again shows you are not only ignorant of objectivism, but you appear to be ignorant of political philosophy too. There is a big reason to make a distinction between positive rights and negative rights, between positive obligations and negative obligations. Positive rights or obligations oblige or force action, while negative rights or obligations oblige inaction. Positive rights are an attack on freedom, since they demand or oblige people to provide goods and services to others, whether they want to or not. That's why it's a crucial distinction in a philosophy that advocates and espouses freedom and liberty. For example, objectivism says you have a right to property. Since this is a negative right consistent with objectivism, what this means is you have a right to be able to pursue, attain, and keep your property, and you should be free from arbitrary and unjust confiscation of it, or theft of it, or vandalism of it. But this should not be a positive right to property, whereby someone or the state owes you and is obligated to give you property. The negative right position is one of freedom. The positive right is one of enslavement or force, where a person or society is forced to provide you with property through, say, social welfare. This would be a contradiction in a philosophy or political system that advocates freedom, since one cannot logically advocate rights or freedom at the expense of someone else's rights or freedom. I will place a link in the description bar to a video by, I hope I get this name correct, if I don't, pardon me, a video by Professor Aon Scoble that does an excellent job of articulating the important distinction between positive rights and negative rights. At 39:12, you babble about some initial premise you keep banging on about. I don't know what initial premise you're talking about. You appear to have made it up. You claim Ayn Rand said that you have no moral obligation to anybody in society. First off, you are wrong here, because that is and cannot be an initial premise in a philosophy. An initial premise of a philosophy cannot be in its ethics or politics. It would have to be in its metaphysics or maybe in its epistemology. Secondly, again, I cannot find any website or source quoting Ayn Rand saying anything of the kind. It looks like she didn't even say it. But to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you are not a liar, even if she did say it, not everything Ayn Rand said or felt is in objectivism, and she clearly meant as far as duty and obligation in a manner of positive rights or positive obligation sense. So there is no problem here. There is no contradiction. You just don't know what you're talking about. At 39:21, you again make another error, Hannibal. Our having a moral obligation to people in society consistent with objectivism is not based on the trader principle. It's based on its political system of people having rights. The trader principle is just a principle of attaining value from other people through mutually beneficial trade rather than force, fraud, or parasitism. It is the principle that people should interact with each other peacefully and for mutual gain. This is the reason why I mentioned it in answer to your scenario with the two objectivists. Since your scenario had the two objectivists being in conflict or their paths interfering with each other, which, consistent with objectivism, would not be the case, since that would violate the trader principle and harmony of interest. For example, because of the trader principle, one objectivist should not, and people in general should not, rob the other, since that principle holds the rational and correct thing to do, is attain value from each other through mutually beneficial trade rather than rob someone and take all of their stuff. At around 43:39 of your video, you say Rand never establishes any kind of way by which you can judge an action as actually correct. This shows again you are amazingly ignorant of objectivism. Obviously, if you were properly educated on objectivism and its ethical position, you would know that since its ethical position is one of egoism, the established way by which to judge actions as correct is, as far as it pertains to the person themselves, what is correct is the action that maximizes good for the self. This is just rudimentary knowledge about the philosophy that you don't even know, which shows you are neither qualified nor properly educated to be discussing or holding forth on objectivism. There are several other specific ways that objectivism has explicated how one can judge an action as correct morally. Two other ways is if that action allows one to gain or keep a value, and another way is consistent with objectivism. Man's life is held as his moral standard, so the principle comes forth of that which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good, and that which negates, opposes, or destroys it is the evil. And that is another way objectivism establishes a way to judge an action as ethically correct when it pertains to ethics in regard to the self. Then you mess up and claim the definitions of objectivity and reason are not defined, which of course is false since they are defined in the lexicon and have been for years and years. Then you say something I find very disturbing, which is that there is no such thing as objective morality. To me, it's clearly obvious that there is objective morality. I don't see how one can rationally see otherwise or say otherwise. It should be obvious to a normal functioning person that it is utterly morally wrong to physically harm a child for fun, and that this is wrong as a matter of fact and not simply an opinion. The Holocaust was morally wrong, and that is true regardless of anyone's opinion that it might have been morally right. At around 55:48 of your video, you do something I can only call stupid. You take me to task for reading what Peikoff said. Dude, seriously? You asked about or attacked objectivism. To answer your attack, it is utterly understandable and permissible to cite an expert on the subject. For you to say or imply that citing an authority or expert on a subject means a person doesn't do independent thinking is as ridiculous as taking someone to task in that manner for citing Albert Einstein on general relativity, or for citing Max Planck or Niels Bohr on quantum mechanics. At around 57:35, you again make another error. You claim that I hadn't addressed anything that was said. That's utterly false and empirically verifiable that it is false. At that point in my video, I had already addressed your claim about the hallmark of objectivism. I addressed and answered your scenario about the two objectivists, and I had already answered your central attack or central thesis that objectivism does not entail a moral obligation. And I even addressed whether an anarcho-capitalist can be an objectivist. You also really need to learn what an ad hominem attack is. You need to stop misusing fallacies in an attempt to sound intellectual and get over on your impressionable audience that the person is fallacious, when you are simply ignorantly tossing around fallacies and fallacy accusations without properly using them. A person does not commit an ad hominem fallacy if they address the substance or argumentation of the situation. And I did, repeatedly. In fact, as far as I can tell, I addressed every salient thing you said, or almost every salient thing you said. I addressed everything that was about substance or worthy of a response. Your video called The Passion of John Galt contained a lot of invective and ranting. There really wasn't a whole lot there that was intellectually worthwhile for me to respond to. A person commits an ad hominem fallacy if they exclusively attack the person and don't address their argument or points at all, or they equate someone's character with the soundness of their argument. At around 58:23, you show an incredible level of obtuseness. You said the whole point of what you said is that even in objectivism, you are recognizing moral obligations to other people, which is incredibly obtuse because your central attack clearly entailed, whether implicitly or explicitly, that objectivism does not have any moral obligations. And the reason it fails is because it holds that we have no moral obligation to anyone, but in given scenarios like the one you put forth and the non-aggression principle, it does indeed require such obligations. Dude, you even explicitly state via your misunderstanding of Rand that you think that her first principle says we have no moral obligation to anybody in society. Yet you are so thick-headed or dishonest, you turn around and act like that's what you meant all along, that even in objectivism you're recognizing a moral obligation to other people. But clearly you are meaning that in the sense that objectivism does not recognize any such moral obligation. And that's why objectivism fails, according to you, because it has that contradiction where it requires a moral obligation that it does not have. So when I turn around and show you that objectivism does entail moral obligations, your whole or at least central attack fails. So that means objectivism does have the moral obligations, in this case negative, that you feel it requires but did not have in order to work or exist. You dishonestly misrepresent at around 58:45. You claim that Rand initially did not recognize moral obligations to other people, but later on she decided that you did have it. As far as I know, objectivism has always entailed such negative moral obligations. And if this is not the case, it is incumbent upon you to show that this is something that was put in later. Otherwise, you are dishonestly misrepresenting. Also, if such an evolution has taken place, then the contradiction you keep whining about is not even there anyway, since according to your false statement, an update or evolution of the philosophy has been made which eradicates any said contradiction. So either way, you fail. At around 59:33 of your video, Hannibal, you pathetically misuse another fallacy. Me pointing out that you hypocritically acted like as much of a baby as you accuse others of acting is not me trying to discredit your position or argument by your failure to act consistently in accordance with that position. This is just nonsense, and you're just spewing fallacy claims without knowing what you're talking about, since you acting like a hypocrite there had nothing to do with your position, but your behavior. An example of a tu quoque fallacy would be someone trying to undermine or discredit another person's pro-life stance on abortion by pointing out that that person themselves had an abortion. Do your research on these fallacies, Hannibal, and stop blathering them out in an attempt to sound intellectual and to try and act like your opponent is fallacious when they are not. You are just making crap up. Now, at 59:49, you get all butthurt and start spewing profanity and obscenity at my dislike for cursing, and at me for pointing out your ghetto cursing. So let me address why I have a problem with cursing. The first and arguably primary reason why I have a problem with cursing is because often the intent behind it is to be profane, obscene, and abusive. Also, it's cruel and unprofessional, uncouth, and shows a lack of self-restraint to be able to control yourself and act with sufficient moral decency. But the other main reason why I have a problem with cursing in this context, which is a public and intellectual context, is because I have long been under the understanding that this is not what is done in an intellectual or academic situation. What I mean by that is, it appears to be understood that you just don't do that in philosophy or theology or intellectual matters. For example, as far as I know, I have nor probably will never see or hear Ravi Zacharias curse, or William Lane Craig curse, or Greg Koukl curse, or Sam Harris curse, or Graham Oppie, or Shelley Kagan, or Tar Smith, or Yaron Brook, or Andrew Bernstein curse. I've never heard in years Alexander Vilenkin, or Peter S. Williams, or Onkar Ghate curse, or David Kelly curse. Not only does this appear to be highly taboo in intellectual circles, it seems to be so much so that if one is seen or heard cursing, one loses credibility, or almost like it's intellectual suicide or something. It's just something I've come to understand. If one wants to maintain respectability and credibility intellectually, it's not done. Now, I could have missed something, and some of these people may have cursed in public, but over years and years, I've never heard them do so, ever. And my understanding has been that cursing in an intellectual context is so bad, one can almost dismiss the person out of hand as a ruffian or scoundrel or immoral wretch, someone who lacks the propriety or proper morality to behave with respect, honor, or proper etiquette. That's not to say these people don't curse in private. They might and probably do. But my understanding has been that cursing is seen as very, very improper and disgraceful in public when done in an intellectual academic context. At around 1 hour and 1 minute of your video, you again dishonestly misrepresent. You dishonestly claim that my pointing out how you were wrong on Rand's writing is supposed to mean I'm implying that everything you just said is not correct and that you cannot be believed on any other point. That's a dishonest misrepresentation. Since I never said that, nothing I said implied it, and the correct representation is that I was pointing out your error there to expose you are wrong and to correct your mistake. Nothing else was intended overtly or covertly but that. At around 1 hour and 3 minutes of your video, you again display an amazing detachment from reality. You again claim I haven't addressed anything you said. Are you on drugs that makes you have hallucinations or makes you believe you're in your own make-believe imaginary world? I addressed every salient thing you said in that video. And even if that is not the case, I surely addressed many things you said that was about substance. So to say I haven't addressed anything you said is so irrational, it makes me think you are either a liar or on drugs. I addressed whether a narco-capitalist can be an objectivist. I addressed your claim about the hallmark of objectivism. I addressed and answered your scenario with the two objectivists. I addressed and answered your central thesis or central attack that objectivism holds, that we have no moral obligation to others, and I even addressed your error about Rand's writings. The rest of your video from this point on was just you ranting and raving like a maniac, cursing, being an a-hole, and with delicious and pathetic hypocrisy and irony, spewing the very invective and personal attacks you self-righteously whined and cried about throughout the video. To use your annoying and childish manner, good job, Bubbles.